Hi! Within this class, we are going to familiarize ourselves with the application optimization flow. As we know, the Xilinx XDXL environment is a complete software development environment for creating, compiling, and optimizing OpenCL applications with the objective of being accelerated on Xilinx FPGAs. From a designer perspective, we can organize the flow for optimizing an application in XDXL environment as a three-phases flow. Those three phases are baseline functionalities and performance, optimizing data movement, optimizing kernel computation. The first phase has been identified as baselining functionalities and performance 1. The basic idea behind the first phase is quite simple. Understanding the performance of the application we are willing to implement is a key factor to be able to properly drive the possible optimization. This can be done by baselining the application in terms of performance and functionalities. First of all, we do have to identify possible bottlenecks in the desired application. This can be done simply by having it executed on a standard general-purpose processor. Obviously, the execution itself is not enough. We do have to run the application with profiling tools like GNU, gproof, and Valgrind. Because of this, we are going to collect profiling data showing the call graph with the number of calls to all functions and their execution time. Within this context, we can use this information as a starting point to identify possible candidates to be implemented onto the FPGAs. As an example, we may be willing to offload onto the FPGAs the function that consume the most execution time. Once the target functions have been identified, we are ready to generate a first implementation of our application that can be used to generate a working design on the FPGA to get the baseline performance and resource number. This can be done by entering into a conversion step where we are going to convert the host code to use OpenCL API for data movement and task scheduling, the selected target function to CL or C, C++ kernels. Now that we have a first idea on and implementation of what is going to be implemented as a hardware component or as a software modules, we can verify the correctness of our implementations by running CPU and hardware emulations. This is a very important step because the hardware and CPU emulation will generate profiling data on the host code and the kernels. All this data will allow us to have a better understanding on the baseline performance and the resource utilization. The last step in baselining is finally to build and run the design application on an FPGA acceleration card. Once we will have done this, we will now be able to analyze the reports from the system compilation and the profiling data from application execution to see the actual performance and resource utilization. All the generated reports during this phase are important to properly drive the possible optimizations to compare the obtained results to them. A key factor to gather runtime performance is how data can be efficiently moved, and that is why, after baselining the performance, the first optimization we are interested at is optimizing data movement. As we know, in the OpenCL programming model, to provide the necessary data for the computation to the kernels, first all the data are transferred from the host memory to the global memory on the device. After this, data are moved from the global memory to the kernel. Once the computation has been completed, the results are written back from the kernel to the global memory and finally from the global memory back to the host memory. Within this context, it is quite easy to understand why data movement is a key factor for determining strategies for kernel computation optimization. Therefore, it is recommended to optimize the data movement first before proceeding to optimize the computation. As we can read in the XDXL environment optimization guide, during data movement optimization, it is important to isolate data transfer code from computation code because inefficiency in computation may cause stalls in data movement. Xilinx itself recommends that the designer modifies the host code and the kernels with data transfer code only for this optimization step. The goal is to maximize the system-level data throughput by maximizing PCI access bandwidth utilization and DDR bandwidth utilization. This is not an easy and straightforward task, and it may require multiple iterations of running CPU emulation, hardware emulation, as well as the execution on FPGAs to achieve the goal. The overall optimization flow can be seen in the figure where we can fully appreciate the iteration we have to go through. We may have two check-in points. The first is going to happen at the end of the CPU and hardware emulations. By analyzing the kernel compilation reports, profile summary, timeline trace, and device hardware transaction, we have a first idea of the performance we are going to obtain, as well as the hardware requirements to implement our design. If we are not fully satisfied with what we have, this is the first feedback loop in our optimization phase. Once we are satisfied with our estimations, we can then proceed to build and run application on an FPGA acceleration card, and this will bring us to the possible second feedback loop. Once the goal will be met, we can then consider the data movement optimized. The final phase of the application optimization flow is the kernel computation optimization. The overall structure of this optimization phase is similar to the previous one. As shown in the figure, we can see two feedback loops, one right after the CPU and hardware emulation, and the second one after the implementation of the design application on an FPGA acceleration card. What is basically different is the first step of the flow. In the previous case, we were applying technique to optimize data movement, while here we are trying to optimize kernel's computation. FPGAs, as we know, are reconfigurable devices. This means that we can adapt them to implement the best custom logic to meet the specific needs of our computation. Within this context, the goal of the kernel computation optimization phase is to create processing logic able to process all the data as soon as they are arriving at kernel interface. This is generally done by trying to expand the processing code to match the data path with techniques such as function pipelining, loop unrolling, array partitioning, data flowing, and other. Guess what? These techniques are the ones we are going to explore in the following lessons. Therefore, if interested in knowing more on how to optimize your application, do not miss the next videos.